I'm standing with you, got it all in my hands, but I don't know how to breathe. I'm walking outside, taking in all the air, but I don't know how to breathe. I'm fading.
Hi, I'm Frank Daly, and welcome to That Sounds Interesting podcast. Today, I'm doing an interview with Róisín Curé, who's done hundreds, if not thousands, of urban sketches and produced 2 books. So welcome, Róisín. I'm delighted to have you on my podcast today.
Thanks so much, Frank. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Starting out, actually, by getting a few basic questions. Have you always been painting?
Yeah, I've always been drawing and painting. That's just what I did ever since I can remember. My big moment came, my wake-up moment came when I was about 7, and my mum bought me a massive poster from the National Gallery of Bruegel's Peasant Wedding. And I don't know how big it was, but it seemed to take up the whole entire wall to a 7-year-old. And I had it beside my bed, and I just gazed at it, as children do. I just got lost in it, and time sort of stopped. And I just loved the shapes and the lines, and I couldn't articulate at all what it was about that particular painting that I loved so much. I just knew I loved the colours and I loved the lines, and to this day I that's how I draw: strong, bold lines and simple colours.
So did you go to art college, or are you self-taught, or
Self-taught. I spent a year in art college, and in fairness, you could say that I was taught, because I mean, that was a real hothouse experience at 17 years old, to be suddenly with people who were in your tribe, and for the first time. So suddenly you weren't the strange one. Everybody was a bit odd. We didn't think we were. We were just happy. We were just happy together. So I had a very tight bunch of friends in NCAD. And after a year, as many of the young artists does, I went a bit wobbly and went off and wobbled around the place. So that was the end of my formal career in art education.
Well, it's good that you actually got the experience of going there.
Well, Frank, let's just expand on that a little bit. To be honest, I did not fit into NCAD. I did not fit in, and I didn't know that I didn't fit in. All I knew was that I was failing. I was failing every way possible, every way it was possible to fail. I failed. I was told very, very directly that my work was absolutely awful, and I was 17 years old. I can't put into words how it crushed me, but there's a happy ending. Yes, it crushed me, and yet it ripped the confidence that I had away. And my identity all my life had been that I was really good at art. That's just the way it was. And suddenly I was having people whom I looked up to and who I respected telling me my work was SH1T. That's what they said to a 17-year-old. And I was utterly crushed. My confidence was gone, and I left college and, as I say, took a wobbly path for the next few years. And I don't want to lay it on them, but it wasn't unconnected. I didn't know who I was. My self-esteem was in shatters. I am so grateful that that happened, because walking away from art and leaving that world behind allowed my voice to develop in isolation. I had no one to refer to look at, only the artists who'd gone before me, only the dead ones. That's all I had. I didn't know any artists. I didn't know anybody in the art world. People would say to me, "Oh, have you seen the work of so-and-so?" I'd say, "No, don't know it." So that is how my nascent voice began to develop. I just drew what I wanted. So for that, I am so grateful. And I'm grateful for all that happened in the interim, all the rejections, all the galleries who turned me down, even though I wanted to go and torch the premises for each and every one of them. But little did I know that it was just the universe, and I'm not a hippie, but it was just the universe showing me that my path was a different way. And as I say, everything turned out fantastically well in the end. So I'm very grateful.
Well, that's good, and that's a hugely positive approach. And as it turns out, really, even when negative things happen, if you have a positive approach, generally speaking, you manage to get over things much easier. And it seems like you had that approach.
No, I wouldn't say that, Frank. Some things can't be kept down. I was crushed. I continued to be broken and crushed, but some things can't be kept down, and nobody was going to stop me drawing. It couldn't happen, and nobody could stop me painting. It just wasn't possible for anybody to do that. So I continued to take joy in my drawing, and then I set up a business that offered illustration at its core. in 2009, and I ran it for about 5 years, and I drew and drew and drew for I was doing bespoke wedding invitations, and I would draw the bride's story, the couple's story, from the moment they met until the moment that they got married. So I drew.
What a brilliant idea.
Thank you. It was wonderful, Frank. And my special moments were when I would hand the box of invitations over to the beautiful bride, and she'd be all in the flush of preparations for her upcoming wedding, and she'd have her long, long fake nails, and the hand would go up to the mouth, and you'd see the perfectly manicured nails, and then she'd start crying. And that was always very special, because I would draw her dad there, I would draw her mum, I would draw her bridesmaid, and it was no problem for me to draw them in a very special, beautiful way. It came very easily to me. But I drew so much, because there was always redraws to do, that eventually my own handwriting as an artist started coming out very clearly. And it was obvious to me who I was. Some people know from a very early age, others don't, and struggle to be what they call different. But I didn't know that I needed to find my voice. But when my voice arrived, it was very clear to me. It was very clear. So that's who I am. And I found out who I was. And there was no wonder that I didn't fit into art college, because who I turned out to be was not something that was taught in art college. I was always very light-humoured, very, very funny. I mean, I'm going to say it, very funny as an artist. I love humour. I grew up with the works of Tintin and Goscinny and Uderzo. Tintin was a huge influence on my art, my development of my art, and I was always longing for that lean clair, that beautiful clean line, which that's how I draw. But also the funny. I loved the funny, and all the way I ended up in university and I did science, and all the way through my science education, I always illustrated, or whenever we were having a laugh, I'd whip out a piece of paper and draw a comic strip of all of us, and it just made us all fall about laughing.
It's a super talent to have. And, you could easily have got into doing cartoon development, I guess,
well,
as well.
Well, you say easily, Frank, but I couldn't. Nobody would give me a job. I tried for 20 years and I got turned down left, right and centre. And you can't imagine the frustration of knowing what I was capable of, knowing that I could draw anybody in an instant, and not just capture how they looked, but capture the soul. With 2 little dots for eyes, I was able to capture a soul. And yet I couldn't get a job. I could not get a job. I couldn't get a job as a cartoonist. I couldn't get a job as an illustrator, a writer, an artist, in a gallery. Nobody, nowhere. And that's where I was when I was raising my kids. And as I say, the only reason I came out the other side was because you can't stop some people. And then the internet was around, and suddenly it turned out that the public loved what I did. And I no longer needed permission from anybody. And that was the turning point.
How did you move on from the wedding invitations?
Well, as I say, I began it in 2009, and it was a great business. It was really lucrative. I loved it. I loved my ladies. I loved working with them. And then in 2012, my husband and I went to Mauritius. We took a sabbatical and we went to live in Mauritius. My husband is half Mauritian and he has family there, and he really had always wanted to spend some time there. People used to say to me, what are you going to do when you go to Mauritius for 6 months? And I say, I don't know. I really don't know, but I'm open to whatever happens. And my husband is a very progressive, forward-thinking person, and he gets very excited at the thought of possibilities. And he always told me that in his mind, Mauritius was a place of possibilities, because it's a tiny island, very outward-looking, and people have to be very quick and nimble on their feet. So they're very entrepreneurial. And that was the atmosphere that I landed in. So that was the atmosphere. That was the first thing. We were there for about 3 weeks when I received a copy of Danny Gregory's Everyday Matters for my birthday. My mum had insisted that I brought a huge pile of gifts for my birthday. She still basks in the glory of knowing that that's what kicked it all off. And I tell her all the time, Mum, I'm so grateful, you know that. And as I read through the book, Danny talks about a personal tragedy that happened in his own life. And he had to find ways to overcome the emotional and, practical difficulties, something to take his mind off his troubles. And he began to draw things around him, bathroom cabinet full of bottles of pills and lotions and so on. Nothing special. And he said he drew it about 30 times, and then it suddenly started to look okay. And the book really draws you in. He writes extremely well, Danny does. I was about halfway through the book, and I looked up at the swimming pool in the beautiful tropical villa that we were staying in, this glorious pool surrounded by palm trees. And I said to myself, why am I not sketching? In fact, I said it out loud. I said, why am I not sketching? And I went upstairs, I grabbed my little bits of pens and paper and so on that I'd brought. I hadn't brought much stuff with me. And I started drawing the gifts, the birthday gifts that my kids had given me. Again, no big deal, no big serious subject. And I knew in that moment that my life was about to change. And it did.
Wow.
And I spent the rest of the 6 months, after about a week of drawing things in the house, I took my courage in my hands and I went out and started drawing outside on the road. And I drew on the seashore and I was so terrified. My heart would not stop knocking inside my chest. And all that happened was a very tall Mauritian lady in worker's clothes. She stopped sweeping the road beside me and she said, "Vous dessinez la mer? Are you drawing the sea?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "The sea is beautiful." And off she went. And that is very typical of the kind of thing urban sketchers say to you. They come into your Zen moment with you and they just be.
The initial worry, I guess, was that people would be coming by and criticizing
No,
and
it
whatever.
wasn't that. It wasn't even as concrete as that. It was just, maybe it's a female thing. It was just fear of putting myself into the public by myself in a land that I didn't know. It was just a primal fear. It wasn't. I don't mind if people look at my stuff and say they can say what they like. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. Work away. I've had young fellas say, "You're doing that bit wrong. Do you see that bit over there? That doesn't look like that." And I'm like, really? Do you want to do it yourself? So I don't mind. I love when people come and chat, and I really do. I love it. But so it wasn't that. It was much more basic, much more primal. Anyway, that was the first day, and it evolved into 6 months of days driving around the little hire car that we had around an island full of really, really calm, friendly people. And then I came back to Galway and I continued it, and things began to grow from there.
I think that was great to have that suddenly discover what you were supposed to be doing, I guess. That's the key element that's in there. And that's very evident in your work. You know, I've much more so in the book about Galway urban sketching, because that's much more personal, I think, compared to, even though I really liked your other book, and we can talk about that again in a second, the one which was the Urban Sketchers one. I felt that you were describing your life in pictures.
Yeah. Frank, they had very different focus. I mean, the personal memoir was exactly that, a personal memoir. And the guidebook was exactly that. It was a how-to guidebook. So believe me, I really wanted to be, and as anybody who follows me on social media knows, I get personal in seconds. That's what I do. I talk about my life. But it wasn't, unfortunately, much as I would have loved to have done that in my guidebook, it wasn't a place for talking about what happened when I drew such and such. It's a place for telling you how to draw. So I had to keep it very, very tight.
You set up a group for urban sketchers in Galway. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. It was 2014 and I really wanted to set up a local chapter. So I happened to hang out with a guy, Donald Fallon. He's a lovely, lovely Galway artist. And we were, I think we were doing a Dr. Sketches event one day. And I said it to Donald, and Donald said, "You know what? I had the exact same thought. Let's do it." And at the time, you needed to have 3 people to set up a chapter. So we asked a friend of Donald's, a guy called Jay Penn. And the 3 of us became the co-founders of Urban Sketchers Galway. And Donald's amazing. He's the sort of person who just goes around to people sitting around sketching and just very quietly asks them about themselves and what they're drawing and why. So we really enjoyed it for a couple of years. Then Jay had other focuses and Donald had other focuses. Donald runs another drawing group and I was very tied up with my kids. So it began to kind of take a bit of a backseat. And then a few years later, I kind of kickstarted it again on my own because I think the guys, as I say, they had other focuses. And then we had a great time for a few years. And then at the moment, technically, I suppose I'm still at the helm, but two women in the group are running it now. And hopefully, we couldn't go out at all last year. So hopefully we'll be able to get a chance this year.
Yeah, the last year was difficult for anybody doing urban sketching, I guess.
Yeah, it was. I did start out drawing everything in pencil first and then inking on top over in Mauritius. That's how, because I was tentative, I was nervous, and everything had to be right. But eventually, you just develop a fluency. If you draw enough, you develop a fluency. And I will say that it was one evening after dinner that, and there'd been a couple of glasses of wine drunk, and I was just sitting around. Husband was doing the dishes. Very, very lovely situation to be in. And I grabbed my sketchbook, took out a big black pen, and I drew the glasses on the table, the empty bottle of wine, and no pencil. And I just, because of course I had a little bit of, as they say, the Dutch courage from the wine, I was feeling a bit relaxed and not uptight, and I never looked back. So I little by little, it didn't all happen overnight, but it got to the stage where I would draw just the merest suggestion of a circle or a square with a pencil, and then that would just sort of pinpoint my place on the page. And then I kind of feel confident that I had made the transition to a flat piece of paper, and away I'd go. Now I just jump in with a pen.
Okay, and actually, I think this possibly was in one of your books, actually. If you make mistakes, you just continue on with the pen. And then when you paint afterwards, then you can't actually see those mistakes, or they're not very obvious. And so it doesn't matter. So I still do pencil, I have to say. But one thing I did pick up from your style, I have to say, is I used to use black ink, but now I use brown ink, and nut brown ink, and it's a very good idea.
Everybody's going around with the brown now. You can't even get it, because I tell everybody you got to use brown. It's so nice.
Yeah. Actually, let's talk about a few materials that you use for a minute or two, Róisín. Like, I know you use a pen, you use a Fude pen, and is that what you primarily use? And like, what sort of paints do you use?
I only use a Fude pen. It's got a 55-degree nib, which means it's bent at an angle of 55 degrees. And the bent bit, you would swear somebody had dropped it when you look at a pen with a nib that's bent like that. But the bent aspect of it means that you can get everything from a very thin to a very wide line. So that's why it's very versatile. In terms of paints, I use Roman Schmal Aquarius watercolors. So occasionally I have other brands in there, but mostly Roman Schmal. He's amazing. He's Polish, absolutely fantastic. And I've been very proud to supply his paints for the last while. And it's great to have my own personal watercolor guy, because even a couple of days ago, he said to me that he has some new colors that he's been developing, and he'd like my opinion. And I'm thinking, what? I'm like a sommelier of watercolor. This is amazing. So I'm very happy about that development.
You get familiar with different types of colors and different pigments and paints, after a while, and then you want just those.
Well, correct. Yeah, you do. And if you're lucky, you can work with a watercolor supplier who'll develop your own palette. And Roman is good enough to put my own selection of paints, and that's the selection that I sell now. So they're my curated palette, which I developed with urban sketching in mind. It's not a plein air palette, and the difference is that the colours are much more intense and bright in my palette. You can always make a muted colour, but you can't brighten it up. So I go for very intense hot colours and or wild colours, and then you can always, because that way you can capture anything that's man-made or synthetic in the environment. But you can always mucky them up by adding whatever brown or grey or something like that. But with my palette, you can capture anything you want in the man-made environment, so in the built environment, so it's really good.
Okay, Payne's Grey, for example, is always good to modify things a little bit, I find.
I love Payne's Grey, it's fab.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Yeah. So paper, like what type of paper do you mostly draw and paint on? Well, I've tried
an awful lot of sketchbooks over the years. There's a kind of an alchemy that happens when you have the right sketchbook and have the right paper. Drawing and painting is a funny thing. It's like Roald Dahl with his whatever he used to use, his yellow foolscap and his pencil or whatever he had. I have to have the right paper. And once I have the right paper, then I know that there's nothing in the way of the magic happening. So having tried many, many sketchbooks, I use the Hahnemuhle watercolor sketchbook, and it's 200 grams. But the really special thing about it is, apart from the fact that it's quite well priced, is that there's no size or finish on the paper that stops the watercolor doing what watercolor wants to do.
Of course, yeah, exactly. It has to be able to move. The paint has to be, watercolor paint has to be able to move on the paper through, depending on how wet it is. But I guess because you're doing, like not painting the whole surface of the paper, you could easily get away with 200 grams. Whereas if you were painting, where you were doing many layers, or maybe you do many.
I do many layers,
yeah.
and it's man enough for the job. 200 grams. This particular type of paper, it's perfectly able to take that.
Well, one of the things I found with regard to sketchbooks is that the sketchbook was, I found A5 sketchbooks a little bit limiting in terms of size, and A4 were too big to carry around. So what do you use?
I use A5, but I open it to a double page spread. So there's your happy medium.
Okay, that's a great solution, I have to say.
It's
as
brilliant,
well. Yeah. Okay, so look, just moving on, maybe we could talk a little bit about the courses, the online courses which you've been running.
What can I say to you? It's been a revelation since the start of the pandemic. I was very lucky. I have been teaching children in my local village for the last, 10, 15 years, I suppose. And this particular bunch of kids from my local village are a very special bunch of kids. They stole my heart, and they knew that, and we love each other. And in March last year, when they could no longer meet each other, and because they're very close with each other as well, they're all 10, 13, 8 to 13, all of them. But a lot of them are good friends, and they couldn't bear not even being able to nip into the back garden to see their pals. So they asked me, would I continue to teach through Zoom? And of course I said fine, but I haven't a clue how to do it. And so that didn't matter. Kids don't care. So we did it together and we had some fun. And I had been doing that for about 2 months. It doesn't suit all children. Some children just don't want to be there. Very, very interesting. Some kids are born to it. Digital natives, totally happy with their headphones and their screen. Other kids just want to be physically present. So it's a tricky one. It's a tricky balance for the poor teachers. Anyway, at the end of April last year, I started deciding to take it to my followers and friends online. And I did that. I started in the beginning of May last year, and I have not looked back. And it's a very wonderful and special thing. I love my students. We get on famously. The format is ideal for teaching what I teach. I have a downward-facing camera, so everybody has a ringside seat. We draw from scratch, from the very first blank page. And the idea is that everything they copy from me has been drawn from life. I don't use photos as reference points. So I am one step away from drawing from life. And in that sense, I teach. I try to pass on the challenges that have happened to me while I was drawing that item, whatever it is, that subject. And I try to preempt that same challenge that they will have and tell them how to get over it, because this is something I've done many, many hundreds of times, and I have a lot of experience that I can pass on to them. And always, 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 I encourage them to sketch their own world, whether that's in their own home or whether it's outside the home, whether it's drawn from their car looking out the window, or where they might feel safe and secure and warm and dry, or whether it's something more exotic like sketching on a holiday. And I have a Facebook group for our group, and there's no drawings from photographs in the group. There's no drawings from imagination. They are very welcome to post whatever they like, as long as it's from life, because that's where life happens. And it's so much more than drawing. It's so much more than painting. It's living life. and it's
And it
magical.
forced you to observe exactly from, I guess that's a key skill,
Yeah.
and translate that into an image on page. And
It
I guess
does.
that's a very valuable thing for
Well, it
kids
is,
to
and
learn.
it was actually my friend Blaise Smith and I were in art college and NCAD together, and Blaise and I were talking about that once, and Blaise put it very well. He said there's just not enough information in a photo, and there just isn't enough information, so you can't see properly. Everything has already been translated by the camera onto 2D, and the light might be funny or the lines might not be as clear as you might like them, but you just can't see well enough.
Can we talk a little bit about the books if we've got time? I know.
No, it's
I know
fine.
I'm constantly
Absolutely, yeah.
drawing expressive people first of all. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that for a second.
Sure.
So the barbershop is mostly the same color all the way through, except for little highlights of yellow. So something about it that struck me was the keenly observed barber actually looking to get the little close cut on that person's head. So
I'm not usually that lucky. I used to take my son Paddy to the barbers for years and years, ever since he decided he wanted to go to the barber. He was a young fella. He was only about 11 or 12. And rather than sit and do nothing, I would sit and sketch the barbers. So I have a very large collection of barbershop sketches. They're very hard to do because barbers are very quick on their feet. And the barber you saw there, that's the legend barber in Moore, and that's Ali. And Ali's great. Ali's brilliant. The only thing about Ali is Ali likes to talk while he works, and he has to stop barbering when he talks. So I have to learn to stop. Don't interrupt Ali, or we'll be here all day.
So just moving on to Santiago de Compostela. So you captured some people actually who were at a table having coffee, which is one of your favorites, I must say, always capturing people having coffee. So this pandemic must have been completely interrupting that type of activity.
Well, it was, Frank. It was. But I mean, the reason I like to draw people having coffee is because they're relaxing. They're not going anywhere. So it's just a practical reason. Sure, it looks a really nice thing to draw, but it's just practical. I can do it because they're not moving. They're not going anywhere, and they don't notice you, And even if they do, they're delighted. They love to see someone sketching them. It's really nice. No, in the pandemic, I pivoted in terms of my sketchbook. I just drew my family, and I drew the nature on my doorstep. And I live in a really stunning part of Galway, and within our 2 kilometres, as it was to begin with, I have a whole world. I have trees bursting into bud, and I had stone walls, and I had the river and all the flowers, and I had my kids always, all the time. So I had my dog. I had beautiful things to sketch, and I kept a blog every day throughout the first 3 months until work took over with the classes, and then I couldn't do both anymore. But for the first few months, it was wonderful for me to have a focus. I have to have a sketch for the blog, and I have to write the blog, and I have to hit publish before midnight, or it won't count as today's entry. So that gave me a great focus, and I look back on the sketchbooks. I call them my living in lockdown sketchbooks, and they'll always mean a lot to me. They're my kids and my life and my family. So a really, really special time for me. No coffee shops.
It did force us to look at things that were in our area that we might have overlooked before. I found that when I did the Inktober challenge, though I was doing a Black Rock urban sketches, but I used it as in the Inktober 31-day challenge, and I found lots of buildings that I'd never seen before. I'd passed them a million times, but I'd never looked at them in detail.
Yeah.
And so I get a sense of what you were actually
it's wonderful
doing.
how drawing makes you see.
Yeah. So you have a great sketch of elderly people, and there's another inner room where there are people having a meal or maybe a drink or something.
I think I know the one you're talking about. I again, elderly people are great to draw because they aren't skittish and jump around like kids. They're in some ways their faces are easier because the lines are a bit more defined. I just like drawing anybody and anything. There's no subject that I don't want to draw, I don't think.
Moving on to one other one, which was Café Klimt in Vienna.
Yeah. That was a very special day. Bringing us back to the beginning of the show today, I was lucky enough to go and visit the Bruegel exhibition in Vienna. And my husband's other half of his family are Viennese. And his cousins welcomed me in a beautiful, warm Austrian welcome. They welcomed myself and Marcel, my husband. And we had just come from the exhibition, and the tickets were like hen's teeth. We were very, very lucky to have them. And with my husband's cousin and her partner, we went to the Café Klimt, and I informed them that cakes would be drawn and they would be drawn. And I kept the colour palette as always. I look for the salient colours in any scene, and then I emphasise them. And I keep the other colours to a minimum, and that way you don't end up with a great big clash and things look very tasteful. So that's just a really handy thing. It's also practical because it means you don't have to swoosh around too many colours when you're actually in a little cafe surrounded by, you know.
Actually, that's a great idea, and I know you use that approach for doing the barbershops because you focus on and Café Klimt. It was yellow.
That's right. Yellows
Various
and
different
reds.
types. Yeah. So, which is super. Okay, just moving on. I won't stay on too many of these, but just a couple more of them actually. Nocturnes, Galway. That's a great picture, I have to say, and I love the bottles and the person sitting at the bar.
Oh
and the people chatting.
Yeah, that one was. It was just a very typical example of how sketching can just be a lovely way to spend a day, really. It was a January afternoon. The rain was coming down Galway style, horizontal and in freezing cold needles. And I traipsed down Quay Street and in I went to the pub, and the snug was free. And in I popped and just got drawing. And the bliss just takes over. You just fill in every little line, every little bottle. And I concentrated totally on capturing what I felt, which was the beautiful hot orange flower in the foreground, and then the middle ground, the man having his coffee and reading the paper, and then the backdrop of all those gorgeous bottles. So really enjoyed that.
And that particularly bluey green colour on the background is what caught my eye, I have to say. But actually, just talking about drawing and painting, isn't there, you get in a kind of a zone when you're doing it and time goes by, but you're just doing, so I find this anyway, that you get completely absorbed by it.
You do. It's a very, I'm sure people with far more brilliance and expertise than I will tell you what's happening in the brain when you start focusing on something that you're doing with your hands. So it could be anything. It could be growing orchids, or it could be, I don't know, gardening or pigeon fancying, I don't know, pottery. But for me, it's sketching, and you're totally absorbed with what your hands are doing, and you're transmitting those signals, I suppose, down to the hand all the time about what you're processing with your eyes. And time stops, and you can sit for many hours without feeling cold or hungry. Well, you are freezing. I mean, I'm like a block of ice half my life, to be honest. But you don't really notice. It's only when you put the pens away and you can't actually handle the zips on your pencil case, and you can't do up your buttons of your coat, and you can't put your hat on, and you can't fold up your stool, and you have to go, okay, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? And you go into a cafe with your bits and pieces tucked under your arms and get your hands back to life. I have a circulation problem as well, so it's unfortunate for an outdoor sketcher in Ireland, but I have very severe Raynaud's. So my poor old hands are like white claws after a couple of hours, even an hour on the street. So that's a real problem for me, but you know.
But you draw faster. You draw and paint very fast.
It's not. Yes, I do suffer with my hands, but it's like I was saying. You don't just not feel cold or hungry or thirsty. You also don't notice pain or discomfort. Those things are there. You just don't notice it. You're not conscious of it.
It brings you to another place, actually. That's really the key element of it.
It does. It brings you a great serenity in your life. That, I mean, I'm still a very neurotic person, but I am a million times calmer and more serene than I was before I started sketching. I mean, I'm a much happier person, which makes me a much better mum and a much better wife. I must remind that of my husband to my husband today.
Okay, just a couple more now on the other book, actually, and my favourite book, actually, which is your urban sketching in Galway. The River Corrib, actually. I like that, the long line of houses and the river in front of it and the boat.
Yeah, I mean, that has almost put my kids through college. Not that they're in college, I'm just, making a euphemism. But that scene is so popular, of the long walk and the River Corrib. It's iconic Galway scene, the colourful traditional houses. But I love drawing it. I can never get enough of it. I love drawing it. But that's just a really, really adored scene of Galway.
And the Spanish Arch as well, where you're looking down. I think you said in the book you actually have you go into some room upstairs in another building,
yes,
and there's a nice view.
That's
down.
right. I was very fortunate. It was Galway City Museum, and there are very good people in Galway City Museum. Very good people, and I sat at an upper floor window, and I looked out, and I just got into that zone. Two A4 landscape sheets in a sketchbook, open to a panoramic strip, and another time I was sketching in the museum, and I was so cold as usual, and one of the women who works there, she looked up and she said, "Róisín, are you okay?" And she said, blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Yes, please," not knowing what she'd offered me. And she came up a few minutes later with a hot water bottle. That's what we're talking about. That's how lovely these people are. So if ever you feel a bit down about humankind, just get out and start sketching, and you will find that people are so good, so warm, so kind, and they will go out of their way to make you comfortable and to make your experience better.
Well, that's very good to have that.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, I follow a few people online who do not urban sketching, but they do plein air painting. One of them that comes to mind is Michael Chamberlain, an American artist, and he paints along just below San Francisco, all along the coast there, and he's always painting. And he's done hundreds of plein air paintings, but people come by and he's talking to people and whatever else. He really enjoys it. So there is a great sense of getting involved in some ways when you're actually doing it, just by coincidence more than anything else.
It's more than that, Frank. People are not meeting your gaze when they come and watch you sketch. They can look at what you're drawing, and because they're not meeting your gaze, they're at their ease, and they talk. They just talk, and they'll tell you about their lives, and they'll tell you about their opinions on the world, and I just love it. I love it. I love listening to them. I will often write what they've said. Obviously, I don't mention any names because I don't know any names, but I'll often use a snippet of conversation in my writing, just to share my moment of shared humanity with my readers and my viewers. So I consider myself to be very privileged.
Well, it's great to have that communication, I have to say, certainly. Just two paintings that are very similar in terms of the palette, and one is Busker Brown's and the other is McCambridge's. They are. It's a palette that I just really, really enjoy. It's a lot of Payne's grey, used at different dilutions. It can cover a multitude. It's such a versatile colour, isn't it?
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a very versatile colour. And that combined with skin tones, because I find that without skin tones, it doesn't have quite the same feel. And then I'll use a pop of colour, usually artificial light or some other colour. But I'm very into design, so I have a very strong aesthetic sense. So I like my paintings to be nice and tasteful and to fall into a nice limited palette and not shout or clash with each other.
And that comes through, I have to say, in all of your work. There's always those pops of colour, there's the guiding you in, there's the characters that are in there. They're very nice, actually. It's like a story in some ways. And
it is a story. I was saying to my new publisher, actually, a couple of days ago, that the drawings and the writing, each of them are not complete on their own. So something else is made. A sketch with an on-location story is a new thing. It's reportage, whatever you want to say. But this illustrated reportage, it's not quite that either, because that makes it sound terribly serious, like it might have been, recorded in a war zone. This is just life. It's just life. It's life through the eyes of another human.
Illustrated life actually is what it is. But actually, and the final one actually, which is on that I'd like to talk about on this, was Cava, which is definitely illustrated life.
That's the opposite of everything I've said in terms of limited palette. That is an explosion of color. But how could you go to Cava, a Spanish restaurant, and not portray the hot colors that I found there? But in a sense, sometimes I describe to people in a way that is a limited palette, in the sense that it's a rainbow palette. So that is also, in other words, I keep it very balanced, and I keep the colors very intense. So I hope there's never any risk of clash in my scenes. And I often tell people who are worried about using color, just stick to a very small limited palette. And by that I don't mean red, blue and yellow, which can do a multitude of colors. I mean literally stick to just a few colors appearing on your page. And I do talk about that in my second book quite a lot.
Yes, and actually on that particular painting as well, your eye travels a lot. All the way around, all the various details that are on the wall, on the side, the picture, the people. There's a lot going on actually. There's
a lot going on, yeah.
Okay, so Róisín, that's super. Look, that's given me a huge insight into your life's work, and such an interesting one, I have to say. So, thanks very much for being
Frank.
on this podcast.
If I could just finish off with telling you that I have a new book coming out. It's got about 10 days worth of drawing and sketching to finish it off, and it's an Urban Sketchers Dublin. So that should get you all very excited.
Let me know when that's out, and I will definitely be buying it. Okay.
I sure will.
That's great. I'm looking forward to that, I have to say. So, Róisín, thanks again.
I